62 suspected immigration offenders arrested. There were studies of local areas where people protested.
I feel a bit out of place here actually, because the presentation I prepared is actually a little bit interactive. Now I can either do that or I can think on my feet and tell you about the latest challenges or whatever you want to know. So what would you like, interactive or? Interactive. Okay, you may be sorry you asked for this now. Right, driving Miss May. Now it goes without saying, we know what's driving Theresa May, we know what's driving this government. It's the whole usual political propaganda. So that doesn't even need stating at the moment. But what does need looking at urgently, and maybe what should be the next part of a research project, and desperately does need looking at, is how do activists respond? This idea that we're all solid and we're all united, I don't believe it. And I've got to say, from a personal point of view, the Go Home vans, it has been, for me, and I use a lot of these, my life is run by Bitmojis. If you haven't got them, download them onto your phones. They sum up every single situation in my life. And I thought I'd use that to illustrate some of the issues here. So I'm going to put you in my shoes about what happened while we were taking the Go Home vans as well. And one of the things we do, I think, in the migration sector quite a bit, is just look at things from the point of view of a legal challenge, which is absolutely vital, but we've lost the compassion argument. We've lost the kind of, where's our common decency in some of this as well? So to do that, I'm going to give you some personal information about me, which might say to you what exactly happened in July 2013, why it drove me more nuts than it would have normally done anyway. So I separated from my husband in 2010. It took me 3 years to get a divorce from him, partly because he would say things like he hadn't got a pen to sign. He was just driving me nuts completely. Anyway, the week before, my divorce had finally come through. And on Monday the 22nd of July, when the government released its press release on the Go Home vans, I'd actually met a colleague, an academic colleague, and I was actually talking to him about a new change in career. You know what it's like? You have a life-changing moment, you want to move on, you want to do different things. So I was thinking, what can I do next with my life? You know, RAMFEL had been through the organisation I work for had been through a very tough phase. As a charity, all charities go through tough phases, but we'd had a particularly intense period where we delivered a high number of projects. So I was at a stage now where I thought, I want to do something to landmark this, but I also want to move on and progress this. So I left my colleague at Liverpool Street Station going, right, I'm going to do a PhD, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And said, right, I'll sort it all out once I've been back to the office. Went back to the office, and that very Monday afternoon, I got a phone call from another organisation. And we were talking about some other campaigning work. And very, very much in passing, he said to me at the end of the conversation, you heard about these vans? What vans? Don't know. Right. I said, the government's just issued these vans. Really? Okay, fine. So it was a day like any other. So when we said, you know, there's a press release out there, these vans are touring these boroughs, what would you do? So I put it to you, what would you do? You know what some of you may know what we did, but what would you do if you're running an organisation and you know these vans, you've only seen the press release and it says, go home if you're illegal, and you know they're on your doorstep, what would you do?
Well, I'd ring them up.
We know you would ring them up, yes. We'll come back to you. What would you do? Would you know where to begin to challenge? Would you know how to identify a challenge? It's not easy, is it? All you know is your gut instinct is it's wrong. I couldn't even articulate how wrong it was. I just knew it was wrong. So, and we're a little organisation. We're not a national charity, and that's one of the things that actually disgusts me about this whole Go Home Vans episode, that none of the national charities spoke up until it was safe. They allowed us to take all the risks, all the consequences that possibly could have gone with that before they had the decency to speak up. And we're still seeing that today as well. So, as a little organisation, well, should we do anything at all? And I'll tell you another little secret. It wasn't until much later that I even told my trustees what we'd done. So we watched, we researched, we had a look around, I looked at the press release, And by coincidence, I'd actually had a row, not like me at all, with the Home Office head of immigration enforcement a couple of weeks earlier. And in that very appeasement mode, I mean, I'm sure they think they're Neville Chamberlain sometimes, we couldn't find the van locally. I had colleagues in the police looking for the van. I had colleagues at the local press office, right, looking for the van. Nobody could find it in Ilford or in Barking and Dagenham where we were. And what you see in this picture is the one picture that any of us were able to get of the van, which is just at Seven Kings Station. And, you know, we were just like, thank God it's outside a landmark we recognise. Because we didn't know if it was myth or whether it was just hype. So we did spend a lot of time just trying to find the van. So then it was a question of what you're doing, what you're doing, what you're doing. Now, nobody would talk to us about this. When Mr. Wiley realised that actually this was escalating into a bigger discussion than he was prepared for, all the communication channels clamped down. So nobody was actually talking to us, nobody was actually saying what is going to happen. Now, one of the things that we as migrant organisations don't do half as much as we should do is we don't understand local politics, we don't understand local government, we don't understand the local public sector. And the only thing RAMFELs are quite good at is being quite integrative about the local public sector. So we used the structures we knew had to statutorily be in place at the time or were guidance for the local authorities. And those were things like community cohesion groups, tension groups. We knew the local authority had a public duty here. We knew they had an interest in whether this was happening on their patch. Now, two boroughs, Redbridge, which at the time was a coalition borough, made up of the Tories and the Lib Dems, and Barking and Dagenham, for any of you who know it, at one point has an extreme far-right history and at one time had 13 BNP councillors. Neither of those boroughs would talk to us. I was sending daily emails to every single councillor in each of those boroughs saying, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? This is your statutory duty, fostering good relations, blah, 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 blah. No response, no response, no response. People were petrified because the pressure was mounting. So it was a story of two boroughs. Now, I had a sort of contacts in both councils who were saying to me, they don't know what to do, Rita, stop asking them. That's not my problem. You are elected as public servants, you are serving as public servants, you have a responsibility to make a decision on this, and especially when the guidance and the law is quite clear. Meanwhile, and we issued the legal challenge. The legal challenge couldn't be fronted by us. It had to be two individuals who were directly affected by it. And we were fortunate enough to find two of our clients who were absolutely fuming about it. They actually spent most of their time looking for it, quite disappointed when they couldn't find it. But, you know, would come in every day and say, we haven't seen it today, nor has anyone else. So we issued the legal action. We put the legal action in, and we then had 2 weeks. Now, this was always a pilot, and that's an important thing to remember, that as a pilot, there was no plans to actually continue this for a long time, or we don't know. So there's a dilemma here. Did we give them the currency of oxygen around this whole issue? Did we amplify it? Would anybody have noticed if we hadn't spoken out? Were we right? I still don't know. I am in two minds about that. The media response escalated when it hit The Guardian on a Friday afternoon. Bad timing, because Friday afternoon is not when you want to be at your most responsive. And over that weekend, we had a lot of phone calls. We did our first broadcast interview on BBC Breakfast. And it was at that point when I was up on the train to Salford on a Saturday night for BBC Breakfast on Sunday morning that I thought, I'd better tell my trustees. A quick email went from my BlackBerry basically saying, I think we've had a few problems here. And actually, fortunately enough, our trustees have a very strong position about how we campaign, so they were quite clear on that. And we escalated as a small organisation, at one point having the BBC, Al Jazeera, about 3 other, Russian Today, about 3 other stations, in our small waiting area all at the same time. Not what you expect, you know, and still with clients to deal with at the same time. And it was after a weekend of heavy interviews, and I didn't want to do anymore. I was physically exhausted, and I'd sent an email round to colleagues in the sector and basically said, I am exhausted. Bearing in mind this was the middle of summer as well, so a lot of people were away. I'm exhausted. I need help. I can't do all this media fronting. This is escalating. This is becoming a national story. This is becoming an international story. And how many people do you think responded? You know, this is a strong sector. How many people do you think, sending an email out to about 1,000 people, how many people do you think responded? 3.
Surprise.
Don Flynn, Alison Harvey and Sue Lukes. And credit where credit's due. They were all there at the end of a telephone. They were all there ready to help when it was the most needed. Where's the rest of the sector? Where was everybody else? And I make no apologies to this day of still being angry and bitter about that. So angry and bitter that actually that's part of the reason why I've resigned for this job. I no longer want to be a part of a sector that pretends to be united, that pretends to care, but actually is only interested in itself. So, it was a media-friendly story. That was one of the things that helped us. It was an unscripted story. People have come back to me since and said, oh, you ran this massive media campaign. My days, it was all by accident. I have a terrible habit at RAMFEL of saying yes to everything, you know. I'm really heavily criticised by my bosses, but actually any media interview would come along and I would say yes. We're not paid to be one of the Changing Minds organisations, a big organisation that can actually change the world. And it was interesting because we actually went to one of the funders who helps people provide progressive discussions on immigration, and we said to them, look, we're in the middle of this, could you back fund us? You know what they said? No. We don't think this fits our model. For heaven's sake, if this doesn't fit your model, what does? How else are you going to use anything to challenge? So we had this media story running. We had a visual stimuli, always useful for the media. We had heightened media awareness. And we had humour coming into it. Now, humour plays a huge role in RAMFEL's campaigning. Because if you can't see the funny side of it, every now and then I feel in a bit of a naughty mood. So I'll wake up and say, morning, Home Office, how are we this morning on Twitter? Now, we're actually going to send, in a couple of weeks' time, a series of FOIs to the Home Office to ask them, how do they respond when I say that in the morning? I just wind them up, so I can't wait to see Paul Wiley's face anyway. But humour played a great role. And individuals like Paka Punjabi, who's in the audience as well, were fantastic in taking the humour into this, right? For escalating the issue, for being able to explain it, for being able to actually make it available and accessible to a broader public. So the oxygen of publicity. Then I had to have that coffee with Mr. Wiley. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. So outside Beckett House, hot summer's day, and he says, let's talk about this. I was like, oh, do I have to? I'm not a very good social networker. I'm an awkward person. I don't like people most of the time. So having coffee was not going to be a comfortable scenario for me. And he said, and it didn't start off too well, because he said, what would you like? And I said, I'll buy my own. I'm not going down that line. So he just looked at me. I can buy you coffee, can't I? No, you can't. And he went to peppermint tea. I don't do coffee. So we had that coffee, and literally he said to us, we've looked at your accounts. We've looked at your accounts. You're struggling. We're a charity. All charities struggle. You know, we're giving a lot of money for voluntary returns. Something you're interested in? I said, excuse me, you're offering me money? Put it in paper. Go on, put it on paper. And you don't see that, I don't just run with that completely. But that's a rhetoric that's forced upon us. We've now also got, and we see it quite clearly in the Mediterranean. No, without a shadow of a doubt, of course, what's going on in the Mediterranean has to be addressed. We have to campaign on it. But we're in danger of replicating this whole scenario about the deserving and the non-deserving. So these are all asylum seekers. We've got to plead for mercy. And our big NGOs are extremely guilty of doing this. What about the overstayers? We only see 2 or 3% of our clients are asylum seekers, or people who've got an application in waiting for a long time. Bulk of our work is overstayers. Bulk of our work is people, yes, who are economic migrants, who've come here to have a better life. And actually, who are we to deny them that? And I think that's a real challenge, because we're looking for the asylum to explain everything in migration. We've got a big job to do as campaigners to actually explain to people immigration isn't just about asylum. There's a bigger public debate to be had out there. And funding, as always, you know, it goes without saying, you can always be blackmailed into not to speaking out. And I know organisations have taken the bait as well. So overall, how the migrant sector works on campaigning, it's a big fail as far as I'm concerned. So what can we do to move forward? Campaigning has to be integrated into your core work. It cannot be an add-on. It cannot be an extra. It cannot be something that actually you pick up one day and you drop the other. It's got to be consistent throughout your work. As I said earlier, as migrant organisations, we work in silos. We only know about migration. We don't talk about anything else. I'm pleased to say at RAMFEL, we have everybody coming through our door. You know, regardless, we don't turn anybody away because we understand we have a wider duty to address all inequality. We set up the local LGBT forum. We set up the local disability forum. And everybody would turn around to me, are there many LGBT migrants in the borough? It doesn't matter. Not everything has to be migration related, but everything is equality related. So there's a huge challenge there. Be persistent, be clear, and be concise. The amount of waffle that goes on in this sector. Why do we spend ages and ages talking about things that can actually just be said in 2 minutes? Complete meetings for meetings' sake. That has got to stop. We have got to have more direct action. And take risks. I am so frustrated by organisations that will not take risks on campaigning. Yes, we've got the lobbying bill. Yes, we've got restrictions on what we can do as charities. But that doesn't mean you can't circumvent the rules. We've not been, touch wood, we've not been pulled up once for what we've actually said or done in public. And our two main priorities at the moment around campaigning are homelessness, policing and criminalisation. And I'll give you 2 quick issues to consider around that. Homelessness, and this is a classic example, the Greater London Authority, this is very London specific, but you can imagine this happens in all the regions as well. The Greater London Authority has just published a strategy on how it will fund homelessness services in London. That whole strategy is totally comprised up of enforcement. It talks about enforcing migrants who don't have rights back off the streets, right, and back in. Now, that commissioning framework, that consultation was only given to homeless charities that were already funded by them to do that same work. Now, by accident, we got a copy of that and we sent in a massive response. The deadline was Friday. We only got the report on the Thursday. We smashed a 7-page detailed response that was very pedantic, sent it back to them, and now they've actually extended the deadline because we've said you didn't consult with any other migrant organisations. But on that original circulation list, the national charities were there. They failed to speak out. And in the conversation that's been going on in between, what have those national charities said? Well, why don't we have a private discussion with the GLA? Why do you want to have a private discussion? So you can secure up the funding again. So there's very much a divide and rule mentality, and until we understand that the cause is bigger than the organisation, we're not going to be able to address many of this. And policing and criminalisation. Anybody watching MPS on the box? No, it's not called MPS on the box. What's it called? The Met. Try to avoid it. Oh, it's worth watching. Just because, I mean, the classic this week was, well, there was everything you can imagine about race. One of our big challenges, and what we keep saying to the Metropolitan Police at the moment is, you don't discuss migration. Your relationship, your collaboration with the Home Office causes huge problems. You need to be clear about what you're doing. And it was quite interesting because, you know, when the Mets have their call signs and they say things like, I see 3 male running down the street as well, what you heard over the radio on the Met the other day was, oh, there's a Somali bloke running down the road, go after him. Well, how do you know he's Somali? Did you stop and ask his passport before he ran off? So there's a huge amount of work to be done around criminalisation, and that's where migration is going. It's all about criminalising people who haven't got status. And that is it from me.
I just wanted to talk about criminalisation of undocumented migrants and applicants. One of the things, sorry, I'm Nina from the South of Black Sisters. One of the things that I've noticed through the appeals tribunal, immigration appeals tribunal, what's happening is that one judge whose husband, woman's husband was arrested and charged with ABH. The judge actually told the Home Office to ensure that he was in there 2 years, 1 day and deported straight from the prison. So they're using that mechanism as a way of deportation as well, so ensuring that somebody goes in for 2 years. Now, you've never seen on domestic violence cases that anybody's actually arrested and charged and put in prison, but now they're using that method in order to ensure that that person is deported back. So it's interesting to see how the Home Office is beginning to use criminalisation and deportation hand in hand then.
Yeah, Rita. I mean, I think for those of you who don't know, that is part of something called Operation Nexus. And that is really, the publicity around Operation Nexus says it's only about high harm, high risk criminals. But we are seeing people who shoplifted from Lidl being taken in onto the Nexus. And it's very pervasive because actually it starts from custody suites. So you can be taken in on suspicion and into a custody suite, and you will have your immigration status checked. And you will be detained, in theory, if the Home Office has got the resources to send somebody down. Or you'll be given an IS-96 and released. So I think that they're trying, it's about squeezing people into a very tight space where actually they'll bubble to the surface, which is what this whole criminalisation stuff is about.
Okay. There was a question at the back. No? Okay.
I would like to raise an issue which you said, and I'm very happy about it, that you can't actually separate immigration from discrimination. You said that you applied or sent an email to 30 people and only 5 responded. And that goes to show covert discrimination, not against people who are not in quotes, English in this country.
Can I come back?
Yeah.
I think just to be clear, what I was saying was that when we as an organisation were asking for help, we had sent an email around to 1,000 people and said, you are all specialists working in immigration as well. We are struggling to amplify this voice at the moment, can you help? And of those people, only 3 people came back. And I think that, yes, then I'm not sure if that list was more about discrimination or about fear.
Well, I think that remains to be seen.
Yeah, well, possibly. But I think there's also an element of fear. People are worried about speaking out about this, especially if there's migrant community organisations, they're funded in part by the government or have close working relationships with the government. And we should be mature enough to find a way of separating an operational response to an issue to a strategic response to a broader campaigning issue.
Okay, I think there's a question just here. Any other question? Yeah. No. Yeah. No, I thought it was the person in front of you had a question, but maybe. Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Rita. That was fantastic and really energising. And I found your comments on people trying to distinguish between asylum seekers and economic migrants really frustrating. I'm actually a journalist, and I find it really frustrating when I go to charities and I say I want to write about this issue and I want to show the complexities, and they try and bring me a perfect case study. So I wonder how you approach journalists and how you work with them, because the sort of reporting I try and do is to try and show the differences between the different statuses of people coming, but I'm not so interested in painting the perfect migrant, and a lot of charities seem to want to give that to journalists, and I think that's part of the problem in how we tackle these sorts of issues.
It's like a really trend, isn't it? Does anyone want to speak to that? Gargi, you said something?
I was just saying, look, that sounds to me like they've been on the kind of third sector media training, and unions have it as well, as if journalists got a short attention span, they can only hear if you make it a human interest story and the perfect example. So then we kind of get in a circuit that that's the only story that we think that you can hear.
It needs challenging and it needs highlighting as well, because sometimes people aren't aware of the relationships at all. And I think also what we've got to remember is these larger NGOs have the ear of government. They're the ones who go to the national stakeholder meetings. They're the ones who have those discussions and have a vested interest. I mean, at the strategic level, when you look at just the migration strategic partnerships, the people that are chosen to sit on those aren't challenging. They're complicit in changing the agenda. So what we've seen in London is that the representatives have moved from discussing the issues around integration and settlement to economic migration as a benefit to London. Now that's a fundamental change. How comes none of them have noticed that? So I think it needs challenging, but it's not just those as well, it's those agencies on the periphery as well that are working around the issue of immigration and in that I think the homeless charities are absolutely ripe for attacking at the moment. More needs to be said. A lot of work is going on nationally saying, oh, homeless charities and migrant organisations are working together. They're not. When you've got one strategy that's about enforcement and larger national charities are ringing up the Home Office to say, we're going on, we want to do an operation, we should be challenging that.
62 suspected immigration offenders arrested. There were studies of local areas where people protested. You can't believe government statistics on immigration. Their campaign is to cause anxiety within the nation.